Picture this: a pregnant woman in active labor clutching her hospital bag, standing in the rain outside her own home. Her husband of 5 years has just locked the doors and changed the security codes. Why? Because his blonde mistress demanded it, but what he didn't know about his wife's family fortune would destroy him completely. This is the story of Keara Williams Bennett, and how the cruelest betrayal of her life became the beginning of the most incredible revenge you've ever heard. Keara had always known she was different from the world she married into. At 28, she was a dedicated pediatric nurse with warm brown eyes and a smile that could calm any crying child. She'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes, never knowing her real family. Through sheer determination and working 3 jobs, she'd put herself through nursing school and built a respectable career helping sick children. That's where she met Dr. Harrison Bennett, a rising star in pediatric surgery with perfectly styled hair and a charm that could light up any room. Harrison came from old Boston money, the kind of family that had their names on hospital wings and university buildings. His mother, Patricia Bennett, was the type of woman who measured people's worth by their pedigree and bank account. From the moment Harrison brought Keara home, Patricia made it clear that this foster child with no family name wasn't good enough for her son. But Harrison seemed different back then. He told Keara that her background didn't matter, that he loved her strength and independence. He proposed after 2 years, and despite Patricia's obvious disapproval, they had a beautiful wedding at the Bennett family estate. Keara thought she'd finally found her place in the world, finally had a family that would accept her. For the first few years, their marriage seemed solid. Keara worked tirelessly to support Harrison through his surgical residency and fellowship training. She took on extra shifts, managed their household, and even helped him study for board exams. When he finally established his private practice, she was proud to have played a part in his success. She thought they were building something together. Then came the pregnancy. Keara was overjoyed when she found out she was expecting their first child. She'd dreamed of having a real family her entire life, and now she was going to give her child everything she never had. But something changed in Harrison during those 9 months. He became distant, cold, working later hours and taking mysterious phone calls that he'd step outside to answer. The change became more obvious when Vivian Cross entered their lives. 24 years old, blonde, and devastatingly beautiful, Vivian was the daughter of pharmaceutical moguls and everything Patricia Bennett had wanted for her son. She started working at Harrison's hospital as a medical consultant, supposedly helping to streamline operations and reduce costs. But Keara noticed the way Harrison's eyes lit up when he talked about his new colleague, the way he started dressing better for work, the way he suddenly had so many late-night meetings. Patricia was thrilled with Vivian. She started inviting the young woman to family dinners, praising her intelligence and breeding, making pointed comments about how refreshing it was to have someone who understood their world. Keara watched helplessly as her mother-in-law treated Vivian like the daughter she'd always wanted, while barely acknowledging Keara's presence at these gatherings. The affair wasn't even subtle. Harrison started taking Vivian to medical conferences as his business partner, posting photos on social media that looked more like romantic getaways than professional trips. When Keara confronted him about the obvious chemistry between them, he dismissed her concerns as hormonal pregnancy paranoia. He told her she was being irrational, that Vivian was just a colleague, that her jealousy was embarrassing. But late at night, when Keara couldn't sleep because of the baby's movements, she'd catch Harrison texting someone, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone screen, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at her in months. She found the receipts for expensive jewelry that she never received, restaurant bills for romantic dinners she wasn't invited to, hotel charges for trips she knew nothing about. The final months of her pregnancy were a nightmare of gaslighting and emotional abuse. Harrison told her repeatedly that he felt trapped, that marrying her had been a mistake, that he'd settled for someone beneath his station. Patricia openly discussed how unfortunate it was that Harrison hadn't waited for someone more suitable, someone like Vivian. They made Keara feel like an intruder in her own home, a burden they were forced to bear. Then came that terrible night in February. Keara woke up at 2 in the morning with intense contractions, her water breaking as thunder crashed outside. The storm was fierce, with rain pelting against the windows and wind howling through the trees. She tried to wake Harrison, but his side of the bed was empty. His phone went straight to voicemail. She was completely alone, in labor, in the middle of a storm. With contractions coming faster and stronger, Keara had no choice but to call an Uber. The driver looked terrified as she doubled over in pain in his back seat, but he got her to the hospital safely. She labored for 12 hours, alone, with only the nurses for support. Every time a contraction hit, she expected Harrison to walk through the door, to be there for the birth of their child like any decent husband would be. Their daughter was born at 2 in the afternoon, a perfect, healthy baby girl that Keara named Hope. She held her daughter close, tears streaming down her face, wondering where her husband could possibly be on the most important day of their lives. Hope had Harrison's dark hair but Keara's warm eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing Keara had ever seen. Harrison finally showed up 8 hours later, reeking of expensive perfume that definitely wasn't Keara's. His excuse was pathetic, something about an emergency surgery that couldn't wait, but Keara knew he was lying. She could see guilt written all over his face, could smell Vivian's signature scent on his clothes. He barely looked at his newborn daughter, seemed more concerned about taking a phone call than meeting his child. That's when he dropped the bomb that shattered Keara's world completely. Harrison pulled a chair up to her hospital bed and told her in the coldest voice she'd ever heard that their marriage was over. Vivian had given him an ultimatum, he explained. Choose her or lose a $50 million pharmaceutical partnership that would set him up for life. The choice was obvious, he said, as if he were discussing a business transaction rather than destroying his family. Patricia arrived within the hour, carrying divorce papers and wearing a satisfied smile that made Keara's blood run cold. The settlement offer was insulting, barely enough to cover a year's expenses with minimal child support and no claim to any of Harrison's assets. Patricia's words still ring in Keara's ears. You got your meal ticket, baby. Now leave our family alone. You were never really one of us anyway. Harrison had the audacity to pressure Keara to sign the papers immediately, threatening to fight for full custody if she didn't cooperate. He claimed that as a successful surgeon with family money and connections, he'd have no trouble proving she was an unfit mother. The threat was clear. Sign now and take the pittance, or lose everything, including hope. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. When Keara returned home from the hospital with her newborn daughter, she found that the locks had been changed. Her belongings were sitting in garbage bags on the front porch, getting soaked in the rain. Security guards hired by Patricia stood at the door, refusing to let her enter the house she'd called home for 5 years. The neighbors she'd thought were friends looked the other way, pretending not to see her distress. As if the humiliation wasn't complete enough, Harrison drove by in his Tesla with Vivian in the passenger seat. They were laughing, probably heading to some expensive restaurant to celebrate their new life together. He didn't even slow down, didn't acknowledge the woman who had supported him through medical school standing in the rain with his newborn daughter. Vivian looked right at Keara through the car window and smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile that said everything about who had won this particular battle. Keara found herself at the lowest point of her life, standing in the rain with baby Hope, having lost her husband, her home, her security, and her dignity all in one devastating blow. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and barely enough money to survive. The medical community in Boston was small and tightly knit, and the Bennett family's influence meant that many doors were now closed to her. Other doctors and nurses who had once been friendly started treating her like a pariah, afraid to associate with someone who had fallen from grace so spectacularly. She found temporary shelter at a women's refuge, sharing a small room with Hope and trying to figure out how to rebuild her life from scratch. The other women at the shelter were kind, but Keara felt the shame burning inside her every day. She'd worked so hard to escape the foster system, to build a stable life, only to end up right back where she started, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby to care for. Taking a job at a community clinic in a rough neighborhood, Keara worked double shifts to afford a tiny one-bedroom apartment. The pay was a fraction of what she'd earned at the prestigious hospital where she'd met Harrison, and the conditions were challenging, but at least she was helping people who needed it. Meanwhile, Harrison and Vivian were living it up, posting photos of their luxury vacations and expensive dinners on social media, flaunting their happiness for the world to see. The medical establishment that had once respected Keara now treated her like a cautionary tale. Colleagues whispered about her behind her back, wondering how she could have been so naive as to think she belonged in their world. Some even suggested that she'd deliberately gotten pregnant to trap Harrison, completely rewriting the history of their relationship to fit their prejudices. Months passed in this grinding routine of work, exhaustion, and barely making ends meet. Keara began to wonder if she should give up nursing entirely, maybe find some other way to support herself and hope. The constant stress was wearing her down, and she felt like she was failing her daughter by not being able to provide the life she deserved. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, everything changed. A package arrived at Keara's apartment from Crawford and Associates, a law firm she'd never heard of. Inside was a letter that would turn her world upside down in the most incredible way. The letter explained that after decades of searching, they had finally located her. Her birth mother, Josephine Crawford, had died in a car accident when Keara was just 3 years old, but Josephine had spent every day of those 3 years searching for the daughter she'd been forced to give up due to circumstances beyond her control. She had left everything to that lost daughter in a will that had taken 25 years to execute because the foster system had somehow lost Keara's records. Josephine Crawford wasn't just any woman. She was the founder and owner of Crawford Pharmaceuticals, a medical research company worth over $200 million. More importantly, Crawford Pharmaceuticals was one of the leading competitors to Vivian's family business, and they held patents on several drugs that Harrison's hospital desperately needed for their pediatric wing. The inheritance wasn't just money, though that was life-changing enough. Keara had inherited control of a pharmaceutical empire, research facilities, patents worth millions, and a network of connections that spanned the global medical community. In an instant, she had gone from being a struggling single mother to one of the most powerful women in the pharmaceutical industry, but the irony was even sweeter than the fortune. As Keara learned more about her inheritance, she discovered that Vivian's family company had been trying to buy out Crawford Pharmaceuticals for years. They needed Crawford's patents to stay competitive, but Josephine had refused every offer, preferring to maintain her company's independence. Now Keara held all the cards in that particular game. She hired the most ruthless divorce attorney in Boston and set about getting the justice she deserved. The investigation into Harrison's finances revealed that he'd been embezzling from the hospital to fund his extravagant lifestyle with Vivian. Using her new resources and connections, Keara quietly bought the building where Harrison's private practice was located, giving her significant leverage over his professional life. Meanwhile, Crawford Pharmaceuticals began canceling contracts with any company associated with the Bennett family. Since Patricia sat on several medical boards and had her fingers in numerous healthcare businesses, the financial impact was immediate and devastating. Vivian's family company started hemorrhaging money as their partnerships dissolved and their access to crucial patents was cut off. The medical community that had shunned Keara suddenly found themselves dealing with a pharmaceutical heiress who controlled resources they desperately needed. Former colleagues who had turned their backs on her were now calling, hoping to rebuild bridges they had burned. The same people who had whispered about her downfall were now eager to be associated with her success. Harrison's world began crumbling around him. His private practice went bankrupt when Keara doubled his rent, and his main pharmaceutical suppliers cut ties with him. Vivian, who had seemed so devoted when he was a successful surgeon with connections, suddenly found him much less attractive as a struggling doctor with legal problems. She left him for a tech billionaire before Harrison even realized what was happening. Patricia faced fraud charges for her role in hiding assets during the divorce proceedings. The Bennett family's carefully constructed image was shattered as their financial crimes came to light. Their social standing evaporated overnight, and Patricia found herself dealing with the same kind of ostracism she had once inflicted on Keara. The final confrontation came when Harrison showed up at Keara's new penthouse apartment, desperate and broken. The man who had once told her she wasn't good enough for him was now begging her to take him back. His practice was gone, his money was frozen in legal proceedings, and he was facing the prospect of starting over as a resident at age 35. Keara looked at the man who had thrown her out in the rain with their newborn daughter and felt nothing but pity. She had grown into her power, become the woman she was always meant to be, while he had revealed himself to be exactly the shallow, greedy person he'd always been underneath the charming facade. "You threw away a queen to chase after fool's gold," she told him calmly, bouncing little hope on her hip. Their daughter was thriving now, growing up in a beautiful home with every advantage Keara had never had. "I offered you unconditional love, loyalty, and partnership. You chose status and money instead. Now you have neither." But Keara's revenge wasn't just about destroying the people who had wronged her. She used her inheritance to fund free medical clinics in underserved communities, providing health care to people who couldn't afford it otherwise. She hired several doctors that Harrison had fired from his practice for not being profitable enough, giving them the chance to practice medicine the way they'd always wanted to, focused on helping people rather than maximizing profits. Harrison was eventually forced to take a position at a rural clinic, starting over at the bottom of the medical hierarchy. Vivian married her tech billionaire and moved to Silicon Valley, probably never thinking about the lives she'd helped destroy. Patricia lost most of her social standing and wealth, ending up in a modest apartment, a far cry from the Bennett estate. But Keara's story isn't really about revenge, though the justice was satisfying. It's about discovering that your worth was never determined by other people's opinions of you. She had always been valuable, always been worthy of love and respect, but it took losing everything to realize that her value came from within, not from her marriage or her social status. Little Hope will grow up knowing that she comes from strength, that her mother overcame incredible odds to build something meaningful. She'll know that kindness matters more than cruelty, that integrity is worth more than money, and that sometimes the universe has a way of ensuring that justice prevails, even when it seems impossible. Never underestimate someone based on their current circumstances. That person you're looking down on today might be the one deciding your fate tomorrow. Keara's story reminds us that true strength isn't inherited through bloodlines or bank accounts, it's forged in the fires of adversity. And sometimes, just sometimes, the meek really do inherit the earth.